Captain Zephyr Wren never trusted an alien who smiled too much. The more teeth they showed, the less you should trust them. And right now, Vordek was grinning like a shark who'd just found a buffet of wounded seals. "So, what do you say, Captain? Help an honest smuggler out." Vordek's voice was like oil on a rag, slick and potentially flammable. Zephyr leaned back in her chair, giving the impression of relaxed indifference, though every fiber of her being was on high alert. Honest smuggler. That's an oxymoron if I ever heard one. What's the catch? The Starlight Bazaar hummed around them, an endless parade of intergalactic weirdness. The smell of charred plasma dogs mingled with some kind of alien incense that was probably just as illegal as the goods being traded. Above the din, Vordek's laughter cut through, sharp as a broken bottle. No catch, just a simple retrieval job, a bit of Earth nostalgia, you might say. Zephyr glanced at her crew, each one as ragtag as the last. Lark, who was busily trying to bargain with a vendor over a questionable piece of tech. Rook, who stood like a human mountain, scowling at anyone who dared breathe too close. And Shade, the crew's resident tech wizard, who was currently eyeballing something that looked suspiciously like a weaponized toaster. "Earth nostalgia," Zephyr repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What, you want us to fetch you a vintage vinyl record or something?" "Books, actually," Vordek corrected, his grin never faltering. "Very old, very illegal, fiction from the golden age of Earth." Zephyr snorted. "You mean the rad age of ridiculousness? Those humans were mad back then." Vordek nodded, a gesture that somehow managed to look conspiratorial. "Exactly, which makes them all the more valuable and all the more dangerous depending on who gets their hands on them. That was the kicker, wasn't it? The forbidden fruit." In a universe full of advanced tech and alien wonders, nothing was more tantalizing than ancient human stupidity. Zephyr straightened up, fixing Vordek with a stare that could melt steel. "What's in it for us?" The alien leaned forward, his tone dropping, as if afraid the very walls had ears. "Payment is in the form of rare Caledonian gems." Zephyr's heart skipped a beat despite herself. Caledonian gems weren't just rare, they were practically mythical. Payment like that could set them up for a long time. "All right," she said with a casual shrug, as though her pulse wasn't trying to break the sound barrier. "Consider us intrigued." Vordek's grin widened. "Excellent. I knew you were the right humans for the job." "Flattery will get you everywhere," Zephyr replied dryly. "So where's this dealer?" "2 levels down in the shadow market," Vordek said, producing a data chip with a flourish. "This has all the information you'll need." Zephyr took the chip, tucking it into her jacket. "Shadow market, huh? Sounds cozy." Rook, who had been listening with the kind of intensity that suggested he could break Vordek in half if need be, finally spoke up. "And what's stopping us from just taking the gems now and calling it a day?" Vordek's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Oh, nothing really, except that I've yet to tell you where they are stored. And let's not forget the small matter of my associates who'd be rather irked at my sudden demise." Rook grunted, a sound that could have meant anything from "I'll let you live" to "I'll be watching you." With the deal made and the promise of wealth tantalizingly close, Zephyr signaled her crew to move out. "All right, team, let's go bag ourselves some priceless human stupidity." They wove through the crowded bazaar, past stalls selling everything from genetically modified pets to questionable foodstuffs that might or might not have been sentient once. A group of aliens with overly long necks was haggling over what looked like an ancient Earth toaster, which somehow reminded Zephyr of Shade. "Keep your eyes peeled," Zephyr said as they walked. "This place is teeming with pickpockets, con artists, and probably a few entities that want to probe us just for the fun of it." Lark snickered. "Sounds like home. If your home is a cesspool, sure," Shade chimed in, tapping away at his portable console. "But then again, isn't every planet one in its own special way? Philosophical today, aren't we?" Zephyr remarked. "Just trying to up my daily wisdom quota," Shade replied with a smirk. As they descended into the dimly lit corridors of the shadow market, the atmosphere shifted from bustling chaos to tense anticipation. The stalls here were less about showmanship and more about discretion. Sellers and buyers exchanged goods with the kind of whispering and shifty glances usually reserved for illicit deals which, in fairness, this was. "Lovely place," Rook rumbled. "Has that enter at your own risk charm?" "I find it homey," Shade said, peering into a stall that seemed to sell nothing but ancient Earth technology. "Hey, look, an actual Game Boy." Zephyr rolled her eyes. "Focus, people. We're not here to blow our cash on pixelated nostalgia." They finally arrived at a stall tucked away in a corner, manned by a creature that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts of less fortunate organisms. Its eyes tracked them with the dull curiosity of a bored predator. "You the guy selling forbidden Earth fiction?" Zephyr asked, cutting straight to the point. The creature's eyes flicked over her crew, its mouth curling into what might have been a smile or a grimace. "Depends," it rasped, voice sounding like gravel in a blender. "Who's asking? We're the ones who'll turn you into a galaxy-wide joke if you try to shortchange us," Zephyr replied sweetly, the kind of sweetness that usually preceded a punch to the face. The dealer eyed Rook, whose presence alone could inspire most life forms to reconsider their life choices. "Right, follow me." They were led into a back room that smelled faintly of mildew and broken dreams. On a table lay a collection of dusty old books, covers adorned with artwork that had once been considered cutting edge. "Here it is," the dealer said, pride tinging its voice. "The Great Works of Earth." Lark picked one up, squinting at the faded cover. "The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Sounds like a travel brochure." "It's a satire," Shade corrected, peering over her shoulder. "Meant to poke fun at the absurdity of life, the universe, and everything." "Sounds like a waste of time," Rook grunted, crossing his arms. Zephyr thumbed through another. 1984, Political Commentary. With an unfortunate amount of relevance, even now. The dealer watched them with the smirk of someone who knew he held gold and was just waiting for the right price. "All originals," he said, almost as if they might combust into something less morally questionable any moment. Zephyr nodded, feigning disinterest. "They're pretty, but let's not kid ourselves." "You have no idea if these are real, do you?" The creature's grin faltered. "They are as genuine as you are skeptical." "All right," Zephyr conceded, tossing a glance at her crew. "We'll take them, but if they turn out to be fakes, I'm coming back here to introduce you to Rook's idea of a refund." The dealer gulped. "Pleasure doing business." As they completed the transaction and headed back towards the docking bay, Lark nudged Zephyr. "You think those books are actually worth anything?" "No clue," Zephyr admitted, pocketing the chip that supposedly held their payment details. "But Vortex seems to think so, and those gems aren't going to collect themselves." Shade chuckled. "Let's just hope his associates haven't decided we'd make a good addition to the bazaar's more permanent collection." As they stepped out into the bustling madness of the bazaar once again, Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Someone, somewhere, was always watching, and in places like this, watchers were rarely friendly. "Let's get back to the ship," Zephyr ordered, her voice low. "I have a feeling our luck is about to run out." They moved swiftly through the throng of beings, each step taking them closer to their destiny or their doom. The corridors seemed narrower, the light dimmer, as if the bazaar itself was closing in around them. A chill ran down Zephyr's spine, the kind of premonition that no amount of bravado could shake off. Rook suddenly stopped, holding up a hand. "We're being tailed," Zephyr cursed under her breath. "How many?" "Too many," Rook replied, cracking his knuckles with ominous intent. "Great," Lark muttered. "Nothing like a good chase to end the day." "Let's not stick around to find out what they want," Zephyr said, adrenaline kicking in. "Move it, people." As they broke into a run, the bazaar erupted into chaos, the sound of pursuit hot on their heels. In a universe where the past was forbidden and the future uncertain, one thing was for sure. This job was going to get a whole lot messier. The bazaar was a swirling vortex of chaos behind them as Zephyr and her crew navigated the narrow corridors, each one more claustrophobic than the last. The sound of pursuit was unmistakable, A cacophony of footsteps, guttural growls, and the occasional alien cursing in a language that sounded like a blender full of gravel and regret. "Remind me why we're running again," Lark panted, dodging a vendor hawking what looked suspiciously like fried tentacle on a stick. "Because we're the kind of idiots who decided forbidden books were worth it," Zephyr shot back, leaping over a crate of dubious origin. "And because I'd rather not find out what happens if they catch us." Rook, ever the mountain of pragmatism, was bringing up the rear, an imposing wall of muscle and intimidation that made even the most foolhardy pursuers think twice. "You mean besides a new collection of scars? Scars build character," Zephyr quipped, skidding around a corner. "But I'd prefer to keep my character development to a minimum today." Shade was in the middle, clutching his portable console like it was a lifeline. "If we survive this, I'm getting a promotion," he declared with the confidence of a man who knew he was lying. "Keep dreaming," Zephyr called over her shoulder. "And try not to get shot while you're at it." The corridors twisted and turned, each one giving the impression that they were running in circles. Zephyr's instincts screamed danger. Every shadow felt like it held a knife, every corner a potential trap. They burst into an open area, the chatter and clamor of the bazaar falling away as they entered what felt like the eye of a storm. It was a momentary reprieve, a heartbeat's worth of calm before the chaos resumed. "Where the hell are we?" Lark wondered aloud, glancing around at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Lost, probably," Rook grumbled, scanning the area with a warrior's gaze. "Not lost," Zephyr corrected, looking ahead. "Just temporarily misplaced." Before anyone could respond, a figure stepped out from the shadows, tall, lithe, and with enough teeth on display to put a dentist's nightmare to shame. Zephyr's heart sank. A smile like that was never a good sign. "Well, well," the figure drawled, voice smooth as oil on glass. "Look what the asteroid dragged in." "Great," Zephyr muttered, coming to a halt. More company. The alien had the kind of presence that screamed trouble, the kind that made your survival instincts throw in the towel and start praying. Behind it, a small group of equally menacing figures hovered, watching with predatory interest. "Name's Fenris," the alien said, flashing more teeth. "Heard you folks were in the market for a little Earth nostalgia." Zephyr crossed her arms, projecting a calm she didn't feel. "What's it to you?" Fenris shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to look both casual and threatening. "Let's just say our interests align. Those books you're carting around happen to be of great interest to my employers." "And who might they be?" Shade asked, his curiosity piqued despite himself. Fenris's grin widened. "Let's just say they're not the kind you want to owe money to." Zephyr exchanged a glance with Rook, who nodded imperceptibly. He was ready, and that was all she needed to know. "Sorry, we're not looking for any new friends. Our dance card's full." "I'm afraid this isn't optional," Fenris replied, stepping forward. The air seemed to crackle with tension, every eye in the vicinity locked onto the unfolding scene. "You see, those books contain ideas, dangerous ideas, the kind that could, say, destabilize an entire galactic order." Zephyr raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought they just had bad poetry and worse writing." Fenris chuckled, a sound that was anything but reassuring. "Oh, there's plenty of that too. But buried beneath the nonsense is the kind of philosophy that makes rulers nervous and revolutionaries excited." "So," Lark interjected, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "you're saying we accidentally picked up a revolution starter kit?" "Precisely," Fenris said, his expression turning serious. "And that's why we need them back." Zephyr considered her options. Fighting wasn't on the menu, not against these odds. But giving up the books without a fight wasn't exactly appealing either. "All right, Fenris, how about a counteroffer?" "I'm listening," Fenris said, though his demeanor suggested he was more interested in their surrender than negotiation. "You let us walk away with the books and we pretend this little chat never happened. You get to keep your teeth intact and we get to keep our dignity. Sound fair?" Fenris's smile was all fangs. "Afraid not, Captain. My employers aren't the forgiving kind and they don't take no for an answer." Rook shifted his stance, subtly positioning himself between Zephyr and the threat. Seems like you're the ones who need a lesson in negotiation, Zephyr sighed. Looks like we'll have to do this the hard way. The next few moments were a blur. Rook moved like a force of nature, his bulk turning into a whirlwind of fists and fury. Zephyr ducked and weaved, every movement calculated, every blow measured. Shade was at her side, wielding his console like a weapon, using it to disrupt their opponent's tech. The fight was swift and brutal, a dance of violence and desperation. Fenris and his crew were formidable, but they'd underestimated the resolve of a crew with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Eventually, with Fenris and his gang on the ground nursing their wounds, Zephyr and her crew stood victorious. It was a hollow victory, one that felt more like survival than triumph. "We should leave," Shade said, glancing around nervously. "Before more of them show up," Zephyr nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. "Let's get to the ship." As they navigated the winding corridors back to their docking bay, Zephyr couldn't help but think about what Fenris had said. The idea that those old books could sow discord in the galaxy was both absurd and terrifying. "Think there's any truth to what he said?" Lark asked, as if reading her mind. "Probably," Zephyr replied, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. "But it's not our problem. We just need to get paid and get out of here." Rook grunted in agreement. The sooner, the better. They emerged into the docking area, the familiar sight of their ship a welcome relief. It wasn't much to look at, but it was home, and right now, home was exactly where they needed to be. Once aboard, Zephyr wasted no time getting them up and running. The engines roared to life, the hum of power a comforting reminder of their escape. "Course set for the rendezvous point," Shade reported, his fingers dancing over the console. Zephyr nodded, settling into her chair. "Let's get those gems and get out of this mess." As they shot into the void, the stars a blur around them, Zephyr allowed herself a moment of reflection. They were alive, they had the books, and soon they'd have the gems. But the weight of what they carried was heavier than she cared to admit. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and horrors, and ideas that had the power to change everything. But for now, all that mattered was the next job, the next payday, and the next chance to keep surviving in a universe that seemed hell-bent on ending them. "Captain," Lark said, breaking the silence, "if these books are really that dangerous, why are we delivering them?" "Because we're getting paid," Zephyr replied, the truth as simple and dark as the vacuum of space. "And because someone else would if we didn't." Lark chuckled, a sound that was more resigned than amused. "Fair enough." Shade leaned back in his seat, a satisfied grin on his face. "At least we didn't die in a back alley this time. And there's a bright side," Rook added, a rare hint of humor in his gravelly voice. Zephyr smiled despite herself. "Let's hope that trend continues for a while." As they hurtled through space, the stars stretched out before them like the endless possibilities they couldn't quite grasp. The future was uncertain, but for now, they were alive and together. And that was enough, even in a universe where danger lurked behind every corner, and the past had a way of clawing its way back into the present. In the end, they were just a crew trying to make their way in a galaxy that didn't care whether they lived or died. But maybe, just maybe, they could carve out a little piece of existence on their own terms. The ship hummed along the empty void, a barely held-together tin can rocketing through space with a crew whose combined talents were rivaled only by their individual desires to get as far from each other as possible. Captain Zephyr, Wren leaned back in her chair, an exhausted grin on her face. It was one of those smiles that said, "I'm too tired to care, but I'm still here." "Nice flying back there," Lark said, propping her boots on the console, an act of defiance against the universe's chaos. Zephyr snorted. "Thanks. If I ever get tired of this life, I'll take up dance. The moves are about the same, just with less chance of getting shot. Don't sell yourself short." "Plenty of dancers get shot in the right bars," Lark quipped. Rook was busy cleaning his nails with a knife, a task that seemed more meditative than hygienic. "What about Fenris and his merry band of tooth fairies? Think they'll be back?" Zephyr shrugged. "If they do, they'll have to find us first. And if they find us, they'll wish they hadn't." "Optimistic," Shade said. eyes glued to the portable console like it was his firstborn. He tapped a few buttons and swore under his breath, a litany of curses that would make a sailor blush. "Problem?" Zephyr asked, a touch of sarcasm in her tone. She knew the answer already. Nothing good ever came from Shade's outbursts. "Just a tiny one," Shade replied, holding up the console like a priest offering a sacrament. "Our little showdown back there fried half our navigation systems." Rook let out a low whistle. "So we're flying blind." "Not completely," Shade reassured, though his expression was anything but reassuring. "More like flying with one eye covered." "Fantastic," Zephyr drawled. "Remind me to send Fenris a thank you card, maybe with a nice box of chocolates filled with anthrax." Lark glanced over at Shade. "Can you fix it?" Shade was already furiously tapping away, his fingers a blur of desperation. "Give me an Ior and a stiff drink and maybe I'll have some good news." Zephyr sighed, massaging her temples. "Just keep us on course. Last thing we need is to drift into a black hole or some other cosmic mess. We're supposed to be rendezvousing with Vortex soon, and I don't fancy being late for my own execution." Rook chuckled, a sound like gravel being ground underfoot. "Vortex the kind of guy who'd schedule your death by appointment, isn't he?" "You got that right," Zephyr replied, her eyes narrowing as she remembered their slithery smuggler contact. "But something about him doesn't sit right with me, like a snake with a limp." "At least he didn't flash too many teeth," Lark offered. "Yet," Zephyr countered. "And given our luck, he's probably planning to eat us alive, metaphorically speaking." Lark raised an eyebrow. "That's comforting." Their banter was interrupted by an alert beeping from the console. Shade's face fell further, a feat Zephyr hadn't thought possible. "Incoming transmission. It's Vortex." "Speak of the devil," Zephyr muttered. She hit the button to open the communications line, and Vortex's slick, too-charming face filled the screen. He had the kind of smile that made you want to count your fingers after a handshake. "Ah, Captain Zephyr," Vortex purred, his voice slicker than oil on a rain-slicked street. "I trust your journey is going." "Smoothly." "Smooth as sandpaper," Zephyr deadpanned. "What's the deal, Vortex?" "You sound like a man who knows something we don't." Vortex's grin widened, shark-like. "Not at all, my dear, just checking in on our mutual interests." "Hate to break it to you, but we're fresh out of trust," Zephyr replied, her voice icy. "Cut to the chase, Vortex. Are we doing this deal or not?" "Patience, Captain," Vortex chided, as if scolding a child for asking too many questions. "All in good time. First, there's a small matter we need to discuss." Zephyr didn't like the sound of that, not one bit. "What matter?" Vortex's grin didn't falter. "Let's just say I've had a change of heart, a modification in our arrangement." "How convenient," Lark muttered, rolling her eyes. "Why am I not surprised?" Zephyr's patience was wearing thinner than solar sails in a meteor storm. "Spit it out, Vortex." "We're not in the mood for games." Vortex's expression shifted, a predatory look in his eyes. "The books, Captain, my employers have expressed increased interest in ensuring they are not mishandled." Shade's console chimed again, a discordant note that made everyone flinch. "The hell's happening now?" Shade grumbled, glaring at the device as if it personally offended him. Zephyr didn't have to ask. She knew what was coming and she didn't like it, not one bit. "We're being followed," Shade announced, his voice grim. "Looks like Fenris wasn't as down and out as we'd hoped." "Fantastic," Zephyr said, sarcasm dripping from her words. "Just what we needed. Another dance with the devil." Vortex was still on the line, watching them with the detached amusement of a cat toying with a mouse. "It seems you're popular, Captain." Zephyr cut the connection with a growl, turning her attention back to her crew. "Rook, get to the guns. Shade, keep us flying straight. Lark, I need you on navigation. We're not going down without a fight." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, a flurry of activity that belied the chaos swirling in the void outside. Zephyr took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. They were in a tight spot, but tight spots were nothing new. As the ship shuddered under the first volley of enemy fire, Rook's voice crackled over the comms. "Locked and loaded, Captain. Just give the word." Zephyr gripped the controls, her knuckles white. "Let's give them a reason to regret following us." The ensuing battle was a symphony of chaos. lasers cutting through the void, the ship's hull groaning under the strain, and the crew shouting over the din. Zephyr piloted with the precision of a surgeon, weaving through the enemy's fire with a grace that belied the tension in her chest. As the dust settled and the enemy ships retreated, Zephyr allowed herself a moment to breathe. They'd survived, barely, but there was no time to celebrate. The universe wasn't that kind. "Status report," Zephyr barked, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Minimal damage," Rook replied, his voice calm. "But we can't handle another fight like that." Shade was already tapping away at the console, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm rerouting power to the shields." "Buying us a bit more breathing room." Lark leaned back in her seat, a wry smile on her face. "Well, that was invigorating," Zephyr snorted. "That's one way to put it. Another would be suicidal." "What's the plan now, Captain?" Rook asked, his voice steady as ever. Zephyr considered their options, weighing the risks against the rewards. They were in a corner, trapped between Vordek and Fenris, with a cargo that could ignite 1,000 revolutions. "Plan's simple," Zephyr said, her voice firm. "We keep moving, keep them off our tail, and when the time comes we make our delivery and get the hell out of Dodge." Lark nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Sounds like a good plan." Shade glanced up from his console, a wry grin on his face. "Assuming we live long enough to see it through." "Optimism, Shade," Zephyr replied, a touch of humor in her tone. "It's good for the soul." "Something's off about Vordek," Lark said suddenly, her voice thoughtful. "Why would he change the deal now?" Zephyr considered this, her mind racing with possibilities. "Maybe he's testing us. Or maybe there's more at play here than we know." "So what do we do?" Shade asked, his eyes narrowing. "We stay sharp," Zephyr said, her voice firm. "And we don't trust a damn word that comes out of Vordek's mouth." Rook chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. "Wasn't planning on it." As they continued through the void, the stars a blur around them, Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope, the ground far below, and the safety net had long since disappeared. But they were still here, still fighting, still surviving. And that was what mattered. In a galaxy that seemed hell-bent on tearing them apart, they were doing what they did best: holding on. The ship's interior buzzed with the kind of tension that only came from knowing you were inches from becoming cosmic dust, and finding that prospect slightly amusing. Zephyr, our fearless captain, had settled into her chair as if it were a throne made of broken promises and hard luck. She was humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a funeral dirge, but no one dared mention it. "Anyone else think Vordek's trying to play us like a cheap space harmonica?" Lark said, her booted foot tapping a restless rhythm against the console. "Vordek's the kind of guy who'd sell you an umbrella and be the one making it rain," Rook replied, his knife deftly twirling between his fingers. Zephyr snorted. "And charge you to dry off afterward." "He's got more angles than a broken clock." Shade slammed the console, a gesture as tired as it was futile. "I've got good news and bad news. Bad news. We're still being tailed by Fenris and his crew of dental nightmares. Good news. I've rigged our systems to fry the first idiot who tries to board us." "Comforting," Zephyr said dryly. "As comforting as a hug from a porcupine." Their banter was interrupted by a sudden, sharp clang reverberating through the hull. The ship shuddered, and not in the usual way that made you think it was about to fall apart. "Sounded like an invitation we can't refuse," Lark remarked, her voice laced with a sardonic edge. Zephyr's fingers danced across the controls. "We've got company." Unwanted and uninvited. A voice crackled through the comms, as oily as a mechanic's rag. "Captain Zephyr, we have one of your crew members. Come out nice and easy and maybe we won't hurt the rest of him." Zephyr's eyes narrowed to slits. "You hear that, Shade?" "Hard not to," Shade replied, his hands flying over the console. "They're jamming our communications. Can't tell who they got, but someone's missing." "Any guesses?" Zephyr asked, her voice a low growl. "Well, Rook's sitting there playing barber with his fingers and you're not missing," Lark said, rolling her eyes. "So that leaves." The realization hit them like a freight train. "Shade," Zephyr said, urgency creeping into her voice, check the internal cameras. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. One camera feed was conspicuously blank, a hole where shade should have been. Zephyr cursed under her breath, a lyrical string of profanities that would make a poet blush. "Looks like they nabbed our tech wizard," Rook said, shaking his head. "Poor sap." Zephyr's mind churned with possibilities, each bleaker than the last. Why the hell would they take Shade? Maybe they need a new IT guy, Lark offered. Or maybe Fenris wants to redecorate his ship with shades and sides. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Zephyr said, though the tension in her voice belied her words. "We need a plan, a rescue plan, suggestions," Rook shrugged. "Could always blow up their ship, after we get Shade, of course." Zephyr pinched the bridge of her nose. "Let's keep that as plan B." Lark leaned forward, her eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "We could use their interest against them. If Vordek and his pals are so hot for those books, maybe we can arrange a trade. Except we don't have the books. They're stashed safely planetside," Zephyr pointed out. "Minor detail," Lark said with a dismissive wave. "We could always bluff, play their game." Zephyr considered this, her mind racing. "A bluff, might work. If we're lucky, they won't call it. And if they do, well, we'll have to improvise." "Improvisation's our strong suit," Rook said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Right up there with not dying." Shade's voice crackled over the speaker, sounding distant and tinny. "Captain, you there? They've got me locked up tighter than a miser's wallet, but I managed to hotwire a comm." Zephyr's heart skipped a beat. Relief and tension mingled in a cocktail of emotions she didn't have time to sort through. "Shade, good to hear your voice. What's your status?" "Alive for now," Shade replied, his voice wry. "They haven't figured out I've got a line out. Either that or they're waiting to see if I hang myself with it." "Any idea why they want you?" Zephyr asked, cutting to the chase. "Not a damn clue. Think they just needed a scapegoat and I drew the short straw." "Hang tight, Shade. We're working on a way to get you out." "Yeah, well, work quick. These guys have the bedside manner of a rabid wolverine." Zephyr knew they were operating on borrowed time, but desperation had a way of focusing the mind. She turned to her crew, determination hardening her features. "We need to make a move. They're expecting us to play defense, so we go on the offense. We create a diversion, get in, grab Shade, and get the hell out." Rook nodded. "I like it. Chaos is our ally." "Chaos and a good right hook," Lark added. Zephyr outlined the plan, her mind running through the steps like a well-oiled machine. She'd always had a knack for strategy, an ability to see the angles and make the pieces fall into place. "First, we need to find a way to make some noise," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "Something that'll draw their attention." "I could rig the engines to blow," Shade suggested over the crackling comms. "Nothing says look over here like a ship about to explode," Zephyr grimaced. "Let's keep that as a last resort. I'd like to keep some of our ship in one piece." "Fine, fine," Shade replied, his voice tinged with mock resignation. "I'll keep thinking." Rook tapped his knife against his leg, a thoughtful look on his face. "What about those decoy drones we picked up from the bazaar? They were supposed to be junk, but if we can get them operational." Zephyr's eyes lit up. "That's it. We launch the drones, make them look like boarding vessels. It'll split their forces and we can slip in the back door." "Sounds like a suicidal plan," Lark said, her grin wide. "Count me in." "Suicidal plans are our bread and butter," Zephyr agreed. "Let's get to it." The crew sprang into action, a whirlwind of movement and determination. Zephyr watched them, her mind a blur of calculations and contingencies. She knew the odds weren't in their favor, but she'd never been one to back down from a fight. The sound of the ship's engines roaring to life was a clarion call, a promise of things to come. She could feel the tension coiling like a spring, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. As they launched the drones, Zephyr's heart pounded in her chest, a steady rhythm that kept time with the chaos unfolding outside. The decoys danced through the void, a testament to their resourcefulness and ingenuity. "Here we go," Zephyr said, her voice barely a whisper over the comms. "Shade, get ready, we're coming for you." The moment stretched, a breathless eternity of anticipation and fear. Then, like a dam breaking, chaos erupted. The enemy ships took the bait, splitting their forces to pursue the drones. Zephyr seized the opportunity, steering their ship into the fray with all the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. The controls felt alive beneath her hands, a natural extension of her will. "Entry point sighted," Rook reported, his voice steady as a rock. "Prep for docking." Zephyr maneuvered their ship into position, the hull groaning in protest as they connected with the enemy vessel. Her heart raced, adrenaline singing through her veins. "We're in," Lark confirmed, her eyes glowing with anticipation. "Let's make some noise." As they boarded the enemy ship, Zephyr felt the familiar thrill of danger, the intoxicating blend of fear and excitement that came with every high-stakes gamble. The corridors were a maze of shadows and potential threats, the air thick with tension. Zephyr led the way, her senses honed to a razor's edge as they navigated the hostile territory. Rook was a silent shadow at her side, his knife ready to strike. Lark moved with a lethal grace, her movements fluid and precise. They found Shade in a cramped cell, his face a study in relief and disbelief. "Glad you could make it," he said, his voice a welcome balm in the chaos. "Told you we'd come," Zephyr replied, her tone teasing despite the gravity of the situation. "Now let's get out of here before they realize what's happening." Freeing Shade was the easy part. The hard part was getting back to their ship in one piece. The enemy was closing in, their footsteps a drumbeat of impending doom. As they made their escape, Zephyr felt the weight of every decision pressing down on her shoulders. Each step was a gamble, a risk that could end in disaster. But they were together, and that was what mattered. They were a crew, a family forged in the fires of adversity. And as they made their way back to their ship, Zephyr knew one thing with absolute certainty. They'd give hell to anyone who tried to tear them apart. As the crew of the scrappy, barely held together tin can of a ship slinked back on board, their collective adrenaline high began ebbing away, leaving behind a sticky residue of tension and fatigue. The rescue mission had been a success. Technically, Shade was back with them, albeit looking like he'd been through a garbage compactor. But the sense of victory was buried under a landslide of lingering dread. Zephyr glanced around at her crew, each one looking like they'd just been kicked through a cosmic meat grinder. Shade was fiddling with his portable console again, trying to get a read on their situation. Rook still twirled his knife, but now with an edge of nervous energy, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Lark's foot was tapping against the console, a restless, relentless rhythm that echoed the ticking time bomb they'd set in motion. "Well, that was smoother than sandpaper underwear," Zephyr muttered, settling into her captain's chair, a throne of steel and scraped knees. "What's our status, Shade?" "Ugly," Shade replied, his voice flat as a deadpan comedian. "They've got tech we can't scratch and probably outmanned us 5-1. If this was a poker game, they'd have a royal flush and we'd have a used napkin." "Great," Lark sighed. "I love those odds. What about escape options?" "Few and far between," Shade said, his frown deepening like a trench. "They've got jammers up and I can't reach out to any friendly ears in the cosmos. We're flying blind, my friends." "So much for Plan A," Rook said, his knife spinning faster, a blur in his fingers. "What about Plan B? We blow something up and pray." Zephyr could feel a headache coming on, a dull throb behind her eyes like a cosmic drumbeat. "No, let's save the fireworks for when we're really desperate. Didn't we pick up anything useful at the Starlight Bazaar? A secret weapon, a lucky charm, a can of Woo Pass." Lark snorted. "All we've got are those decoy drones and a box of old Earth nostalgia that no one will buy." "Earth nostalgia," Rook mused, his voice dripping with irony. "Illegal, worthless, and probably cursed, just like us." Zephyr's gaze turned inward, trying to unearth some sliver of hope from the ashes of their predicament. "We need a miracle," she said, more to herself than the others. "Or a distraction that would give a magician a run for his money." Shade's fingers danced over the console, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'll see what I can rig up. Maybe I can send out a signal that'll spook them long enough for us to make a dash for it." "Do it," Zephyr commanded, her voice steely with resolve. And the rest of you prepare for Plan C, make-believe chaos. The crew leapt into action, a ragtag bunch of misfits turned urgent conspirators. But despite the flurry of movement, the air was heavy with an unspoken truth. They were outmatched and outgunned, hanging onto hope by the frayed threads of their ingenuity. As Shade continued his frantic work, Zephyr leaned back in her chair, the weight of leadership pressing down like a galactic anvil. She knew that the odds were stacked high enough to scrape the underbelly of a passing comet, but desperation bred creativity, if nothing else. "Hey, Captain," Rook said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. "Ever wonder if maybe we're just the universe's punchline? Like one big cosmic joke with us as the butt?" Zephyr managed a wry smile. "If that's the case, I'd like to lodge a formal complaint with the cosmic management. Their sense of humor stinks." "Maybe they'll give us a refund," Lark said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "You know, minus a restocking fee. Or just an IOU," Shade added, not looking up from his console. With interest. Their banter was cut short by a sudden explosion that rattled the entire ship, knocking Zephyr's chair back an inch on its tracks. Alarms shrieked, a cacophony of impending doom. Shade's face twisted into a grimace, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. "That wasn't us, right?" Zephyr asked, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Nope, not us," Shade confirmed. "Looks like they got tired of waiting and decided to come to us instead." "Incoming boarders," Lark said, her voice taut with anticipation. "Guess they wanted to say hi in person." Zephyr took a deep breath, steeling herself for the fight ahead. "All right, crew, time for a little home defense." "Shade, you said you rigged our systems to fry boarders, right?" "Yeah, but that only works if they come through the door," Shade replied, his fingers still working at the console. "They're trying to punch a hole through the hull." "Love their initiative," Rook said, admiring his knife. "It's always nice when the enemy shows some creativity." Zephyr's mind was a whir of possibilities, each one more desperate than the last. "Get ready. We're about to have some very unpleasant houseguests." The ship shuddered again as the enemy's assault continued, a relentless barrage that reverberated through every bolt and rivet. Zephyr felt the vibrations in her bones, a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. "Think positive," she murmured under her breath, though the words rang hollow even to her ears. "At least we won't die of boredom." Lark and Rook took up positions near the entrance, weapons at the ready. Their faces were masks of determination, eyes hard as diamonds. Zephyr knew that they'd fight tooth and nail for each other, for their ragtag family in this unforgiving expanse. Shade's voice was a steady presence over the comms, guiding them through the chaos. "I've got an idea. It's a long shot, but if I can reroute power from non-essential systems, I might be able to buy us some time." "Can you do it without frying us in the process?" Lark asked, her tone half joking, half serious. "Probably," Shade replied, not missing a beat. "Just, try not to touch anything metal for a bit." "Great," Rook said, flashing a grin. "Zap them, not us." "Got it." Zephyr's heart thudded in her chest, a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. She knew the odds were slim, but they'd faced worse before. And they had each other, which was something. The ship's lights flickered as Shade worked his magic, the hum of energy surging through the walls like a living thing. Zephyr gripped the armrests of her chair, her gaze fixed on the doorway where their enemies would soon appear. Then, with a resounding crash, a section of the hull gave way, and the boarders poured in like a tide of darkness. Zephyr's crew met them with a fierce resolve born of desperation and defiance, a whirlwind of chaos and violence. The fight was brutal and unforgiving, a dance of death played out in the narrow corridors of their ship. Zephyr's heart pounded a frantic rhythm as she fought, her movements instinctual and precise. In the chaos, she caught sight of Shade, still working at his console, his face a mask of concentration. She marveled at his bravery, his unwavering commitment to their survival. Lark and Rook fought like demons, their weapons an extension of their will. Zephyr felt a swell of pride for her crew, their resilience and tenacity a beacon in the darkness. But despite their efforts, the tide was turning against them. Their enemies were relentless, a swarm of hunger and hatred that threatened to overwhelm them. Just as Zephyr thought they might be lost, a sudden surge of energy coursed through the ship. The lights blazed to life, the air crackling with power, and their enemies recoiled in shock. Shade's voice came through the comms, triumphant and breathless. "Got it. Gave them a little shock therapy. Should buy us some time." Zephyr seized the moment, rallying her crew with a fierce shout. "Push them back. This is our ship and we're not giving up." The crew fought with renewed vigor, their determination a blazing inferno that drove their enemies back. It was a hard-won victory, a narrow escape from the jaws of defeat. As the last of their foes were routed, Zephyr sagged against the wall, exhaustion stealing over her like a tide. But even in the aftermath of battle, she felt a flicker of hope. They'd faced impossible odds and emerged, if not unscathed, then at least alive. And in the grim darkness of the cosmos, that was no small feat. As the adrenaline faded, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its wake, Zephyr looked at her crew, their faces lined with fatigue but alight with the fire of survival. "Well, that was fun," Rook said, his voice dripping with irony. "Let's never do it again." "Deal," Zephyr replied, a tired smile tugging at her lips. "Though I have a feeling the universe isn't done with us just yet." "Let it come," Lark said, her voice a low growl of defiance. "We'll be ready." Shade gave a weary chuckle, his fingers finally still on the console. If nothing else, we're too stubborn to die. Zephyr knew that their darkest hour was far from over, but for now, they'd earned a moment of respite, a chance to catch their breath and regroup. And as she looked out into the vast, unyielding expanse of space, she felt a flicker of something like hope. Because in the end, they were still here, still fighting, still together. And that, she thought, was something worth holding onto. Captain Zephyr Wren leaned against the cold metal wall, sweat mingling with the grime on her forehead. The echoes of the recent fight still seemed to bounce off the walls, much like the migraine now bouncing around her skull. Blood, sweat, and something that looked suspiciously like alien goo congealed on the floor, creating abstract art that would probably fetch a few credits on some pretentious planet. "All right, folks," she called out, her voice a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We've survived another round of Here's Your Doomed Fate. Let's prep for Act 2. Rook wiped his knife clean, flicking the gunk onto the floor with a grimace. "At this rate, we'll be the universe's most sought-after decorators. Anyone looking for a unique Death Chic home makeover. Only if they want it with a side of PTSD," Lark muttered, reloading her weapon as she kicked a stray piece of enemy armor aside with more enthusiasm than necessary. Shade was still at his console, looking like a man who'd just woken from a nightmare only to find the world even worse. "Captain, I think I've got something. That Earth nostalgia junk, we've been using it wrong." Zephyr squinted at him, half expecting a punchline. "Go on. If it involves me reading poetry to aliens to bore them to death, I'm not interested." "Actually, it might be better," Shade replied, tapping at his screen. "This stuff is charged, almost like a power source. I think we can use it to boost our systems, or maybe even create a weapon." Rook whistled, low and impressed. "You're telling me those dusty old books have been sitting around like unused batteries while we've been getting our teeth kicked in?" "Figures Earth would leave us a surprise like that," Lark said with a smirk. "Probably left a note saying break glass in case of emergency." Zephyr considered it, running a hand through her hair. "So, you're telling us we've been hoarding a potential game-changer next to the broken coffee machine?" Shade nodded. "Exactly. And if we can figure out how to use it without frying ourselves, we might just get the upper hand." "All right," Zephyr said, feeling the frayed edges of hope knitting together into something more substantial. "Let's turn this literary refuse into our salvation." The crew gathered around the box of old Earth nostalgia, its contents as unremarkable as a cosmic paperweight. "So how do we turn Tolstoy into a tactical nuke?" Rook asked, half serious. "You don't," Shade said, pulling out a decrepit paperback. "But some of this stuff is infused with a kind of dormant energy, probably why it was banned in the first place." Zephyr snorted. "Of course. Leave it to humanity to weaponize even their bedtime stories. They bundled the books, treating them with the kind of reverence usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. Shade worked quickly, connecting them to the ship systems with a mess of wires that looked like a spaghetti nightmare. "Just need a few more tweaks," Shade muttered, his fingers flying over the console. "And pray to whatever deity listens out here. Or fake it till we make it," Lark added, crossing her arms. "Either way, it's better than waiting for another visit from our toothy friends." The ship's interior lights flickered ominously, a sign that things were either about to get better or significantly worse. Rook leaned closer to the makeshift contraption, eyes narrowed. "You sure about this, Shade?" "I'm not keen on becoming a footnote in some alien history book." Shade shrugged, nonchalant. "If it works, we're heroes. If it doesn't, well, we won't be around to care." Zephyr chuckled, admiring their ability to laugh in the face of doom. "Guess we're all in, then. Let's see if we can't give Fenris and his merry band of dental nightmares a shock they won't forget." As Shade finished his work, the ship hummed to life with an intensity that made Zephyr's teeth vibrate. "We've got power," Shade announced, his voice tinged with an excitement that bordered on manic. "And a hell of a lot of it. Enough to send those bastards packing?" Lark asked, hopeful. "More than enough," Shade replied, grinning. "We can hit them with a blast strong enough to scramble their systems. At least that's the theory." Zephyr nodded, the weight of their situation pressing down on her, yet buoyed by the spark of possibility. "All right, crew. Let's make them regret ever crawling out of whatever hell they came from." They moved with purpose, each member snapping into action. Lark manned the weapons, Rook prepared the ship for evasive maneuvers, and Shade stayed glued to his console, ready to unleash their newfound power. "Incoming," Rook warned, eyes locked on the sensors. "Looks like Fenris isn't done playing house." "Then let's redecorate," Zephyr said, her voice a controlled growl. "Shade, hit them with everything we've got." Shade nodded, fingers dancing over the controls with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. The ship shuddered as the energy pulsed through it, a crescendo of power that Zephyr could feel in her bones. The blast shot from their ship like a star gone supernova, slamming into Fenris's fleet with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Zephyr watched as their enemy's ship spasmed, systems fried by the unexpected assault. "Looks like they weren't expecting us to play dirty," Lark said, her smile wolfish. "Because we're such paragons of virtue," Rook replied, not even trying to hide his glee as their enemies floundered. Zephyr felt a thrill at the shift in balance, the unexpected advantage they'd crafted from literary leftovers. "Don't get cocky. We've only bought ourselves time. Let's make sure we use it wisely." The ship was a flurry of activity as they regrouped, their brief respite from battle offering a chance to strategize. They knew Fenris wouldn't be out for long, just licking their wounds before returning with a vengeance. Shade, still buzzing from their success, was already tinkering with the setup, trying to squeeze every ounce of advantage from their newfound weapon. "This'll hold them off for now, but we need something more if we're going to keep them at bay." "More Earth nostalgia?" Lark asked, arching an eyebrow. "Maybe there's a secret stockpile of Shakespeare hiding somewhere." "I'll pass," Rook said, shuddering. "I'd rather keep my insides from turning to mush." Zephyr leaned over the console, eyeing Shade's work. "If we can keep them on the back foot, we've got a chance. We need to hit them before they regroup." "Agreed," Shade said, focused. "I'll see if I can rig a second shot, but it'll take time." Zephyr glanced at her crew, the ragtag family she'd come to rely on in the darkest of times. "Lark, find us the weakest point in their formation. Rook, be ready to jump if things go south. Shade, keep those books singing." They nodded, sharing a look of camaraderie that spoke volumes more than words ever could. In the cold vastness of space, theirs was a bond forged by fire stronger than any metal. "Now let's show Fenris what it means to mess with the best," Zephyr said, a fierce pride swelling in her chest. Lark's fingers flew over her console, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Found an opening. If we hit them now, we might just crack them wide open." "Then let's not waste any more time," Zephyr replied, her voice steady and commanding. Shade, fire at will. The ship lurched as another surge of energy tore through it, aimed directly at the enemy's weakest link. The blast struck true, a brilliant flare that illuminated the void, scattering their foes like leaves in a storm. Cheers erupted from the crew, their triumph a heady mix of relief and exhilaration. They'd done the impossible, turned the tide with sheer tenacity and a bit of technological sleight of hand. But Zephyr knew better than to rest easy. We've got breathing room, but it won't last. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. As the crew settled into their tasks, the air buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. They'd been given a reprieve, a chance to regroup and fortify for the challenges to come. Rook stood beside Zephyr, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond. "You think this'll hold, Captain?" Zephyr shrugged, the weight of leadership a familiar companion. "Maybe, maybe not. But as long as we're still kicking, we've got a fighting chance." "Not bad for a bunch of misfits," Rook said, grinning. Zephyr smiled, savoring the moment. Hey, never underestimate the power of a good underdog story. As they prepared for the inevitable, Zephyr felt a burgeoning hope stir within her. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they'd proven they could adapt, innovate, and defy the odds. And in the dark, unyielding expanse of space, that was everything. The ship shuddered under Zephyr's boots like a drunken mule trying to shake off a particularly persistent fly. The emergency lights flickered ominously, casting the cramped bridge in a staccato of red flashes. If hell had a disco, it'd look a lot like this. "Shade, any chance you could make this thing hum a little less like it's about to self-destruct?" Zephyr asked, gripping the armrests of her chair as if it might decide to launch her into the ceiling. Shade peered over his console, eyes glinting with the kind of manic energy you only see in people who've spent too long staring into the abyss of circuit boards. "I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. We're running on pure narrative power at this point. Beats me if we've got another chapter in us." Lark snorted from her station, where she was busy keeping the weapons array primed and ready. "I always knew those old Earth scribblers had a use besides keeping fire pits warm." Rook, sitting opposite her, grinned as he polished a blade with the kind of care usually reserved for newborns or particularly troublesome grenades. "Yeah, who knew Hemingway could double as a death ray? Or maybe we should call it Faulkner's folly." Zephyr shook her head, feeling the fatigue clawing at the edges of her consciousness. "Focus, people. Fenris and his merry band of dental nightmares aren't going to wait for us to finish our lit crit." The tension in the air was sharp enough to cut metal. They'd bought themselves a moment, but the clock was ticking, and every second was a drumbeat closer to another round with Fenris. The bastard was nothing if not persistent, like a cockroach in a nuclear blast. "Captain, I've rerouted every last erg of power into the systems. We've got maybe one more shot before these things turn into glorified paperweights," Shade announced, looking like he just wrestled a dragon and lived to tell the tale. Zephyr nodded, her mind racing. "Then let's make it count. Lark, Rook, I want us ready to hit them where it hurts. Shade, if we survive this, remind me to buy you a drink. Maybe even two. Only if it's something that doesn't come in a tin can," Shade replied, fingers a blur over the console. "Incoming," Lark shouted, her eyes glued to the screens. "Looks like Fenris is bringing friends, ugly ones, and they've got more teeth than should be legal." "Just what I needed," Zephyr muttered. "More dental nightmares. Let's show them what humans are made of." And I don't mean just carbon and despair. The ship shook again as the enemy closed in, Fenris's fleet weaving through the void like sharks homing in on blood. Zephyr felt a grim satisfaction at the analogy. After all, they were about to become the biggest chum bucket in the galaxy. Rook, evasive maneuvers. Lark, prep the decoy drones. Shade, keep that power steady. We're going to give them a story they won't forget. The crew snapped into action, each move precise and practiced, a well-oiled chaos machine. Rook spun the ship with the grace of a dancer who'd had one too many shots of tequila but somehow still managed not to fall on their ass. "Decoys away," Lark announced, her fingers dancing over the controls as she launched the drones. They zipped into the void, bleeping and blooping like a chorus of mechanical songbirds, designed to make Fenris's lot chase their own tails. "Hope they're dumb enough to fall for it," Rook said, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "If they're anything like their leader, they're probably baffled by doorknobs," Zephyr replied, eyes locked on the display. The enemy ships hesitated, Fenris undoubtedly barking orders over comms that were likely half threats, half sheer frustration. The decoys scattered, drawing some of the ships away, creating the opening they needed. "Now's our chance," Zephyr said, adrenaline drowning out exhaustion. "Shade, hit them with everything we've got. Make it poetic." Shade didn't need to be told twice. He slammed a hand on the console with the kind of gusto usually reserved for dramatic movie moments. The ship trembled as the power surged through it, the literary energy unleashed in a wave of destruction that shot across the vastness of space. The blast hit Fenris's fleet with all the subtlety of a freight train through a plate glass window. Ships buckled, systems overloaded, and for a moment it was as if the universe held its breath. "Looks like we just wrote them a tragedy," Lark said, a fierce grin splitting her face. Rook chuckled darkly. "A real page-turner. Bet they didn't see that plot twist coming." The enemy ships reeled, struggling to recover from the unexpected barrage. Zephyr watched as chaos rippled through their ranks, satisfaction mingling with the ever-present tension. "They're scattering," Shade reported, a note of triumph in his voice. "We've got them on the run, Captain." "Then let's not waste the moment. Get us out of here before they find another chapter to throw at us," Zephyr ordered, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief that they'd managed to pull it off. Rook spun the ship, engines roaring to life as they sped away from the battlefield. The bridge buzzed with the hum of machinery and the ragged breaths of the crew, each one acutely aware of the narrow escape. "Well, that was fun," Lark deadpanned, leaning back in her seat. "Remind me why we do this again." Zephyr shrugged, allowing herself a small, weary smile. "Because we're too stubborn to know when to quit and too damn good to lose." As the stars streaked by, the crew settled into their routines, the adrenaline fading but the victory sweet. The ship may have been a barely held-together tin can, but for now it was home. And if Fenris came knocking again, they'd just have to find another literary surprise to throw at him. Shade leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Never thought I'd see the day where reading the classics would save our asses. Guess that makes us the galaxy's most well-read band of misfits," Rook said, sheathing his knife with a satisfied click. Zephyr chuckled, feeling the weight of the world, or rather, the universe, lift slightly from her shoulders. "I always did say stories could change the world. Just didn't expect it to be quite so literal." As they sailed through the darkness of space, leaving chaos in their wake, Zephyr let herself hope, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, they could keep this up. After all, if humanity was good at anything, it was survival. And perhaps, in the end, that was the best story of all. There's a certain kind of silence that descends on a ship after you've narrowly avoided death and destruction. It's not peaceful, exactly. More like the awkward pause after someone's just made a particularly tasteless joke at a funeral. In other words, it was the perfect time for Captain Zephyr Wren to take stock of her motley crew and their barely held-together tin can of a ship. "Well," she said, breaking the silence with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, "what's next on our list of death-defying feats?" An impromptu dance-off with Fenris's crew. Rook, ever the optimist, or maybe just a glutton for punishment, grinned at her. "I think we'd have them beat on style alone. Unless their dance moves involve less teeth. Knowing Fenris, they probably all do the cha-cha with a side of jaw-breaking," Lark chimed in, still glued to the weapon's console like it might sprout legs and walk off if she looked away. Her fingers tapped a rhythm on the edge, an unconscious beat to match her wariness. Shade, who was never one to miss out on a chance for a quip, added, "Hell, if they start dancing, we're really screwed. We've barely got enough power to keep the lights on, let alone stage lighting for a dance-off." The ship's interior buzzed with that peculiar brand of tension, that only seemed to dissipate once everyone remembered they were alive enough to gripe about it. They'd survived Fenris against all odds, and it felt like spitting in the face of probability. Zephyr had always had a thing for beating the odds, though usually it involved less teeth and more gambling. "Speaking of which," Zephyr said, shifting her weight off the cold metal wall she'd been leaning against, "we need to figure out our next steps. The bazaar's back there, and it might be a good idea to swing by, see what's the latest in overpriced junk and interstellar gossip." Lark's eyes flicked over to Zephyr, curiosity evident in the tilt of her head. "What about the jammers? Fenris's crew had us boxed in pretty nicely back there." "Jammers are toast," Shade replied, eyes never leaving the console. "Whatever we did back there fried them like a cheap breakfast special. We're good to go, assuming Fenris doesn't have a plan B or C, which, knowing him, he probably does." Rook nodded, wiping his blade down one last time before sheathing it with a flourish. "Then we move fast and don't give them time to regroup. I vote we head back to the bazaar, see who's talking about us." "Assuming anyone even noticed," Lark said dryly. "We're not exactly celebrity material." "No," Zephyr agreed, her lips quirking up in a sardonic smile, "but we did just take out one of the nastiest crews this side of the galaxy. If that doesn't get us at least a little notoriety, I'll eat my hat." "Wouldn't recommend it," Rook said. "Looks like it's been through one too many battles as is." Zephyr's hat, a battered piece of headwear that had seen more suns than most people, tilted rakishly on her head as she headed for the bridge's exit. "Let's not keep them waiting, then." The journey back to the Starlight Bazaar was blessedly uneventful. No sudden attacks, no alarms blaring, no dire warnings about imminent hull breaches. Just the steady hum of engines and the occasional mutter from Shade as he coaxed the navigational systems into obeying his whims. For once, the ship seemed to be behaving itself. Or maybe it was just tired of trying to kill them. Either way, Zephyr wasn't complaining. As they docked, the bazaar unfolded before them like a fever dream of capitalism and contraband. The place was a mess of narrow corridors and vendors hawking everything from suspiciously glowing fruit to weapons that probably had more safety warnings than actual uses. "Home sweet home," Zephyr said, stepping off the ramp and into the chaos. The air was thick with the smell of exotic spices, engine grease, and the unmistakable aroma of desperation. "You ever think we should find a nicer place to hang out?" Shade asked, peering around at the bustling crowd. "Nicer places don't want us," Rook replied, falling into step beside him. "Besides, where else can you get a decent cup of brew and a questionable piece of Earth nostalgia all in one go?" They wove through the throng, eyes peeled for familiar faces and familiar threats. The buzz of conversation was a constant backdrop, snippets of gossip and haggling floating through the air like background static. "Captain?" a voice called, and Zephyr turned to find a familiar face pushing through the crowd. It was Tor, a vendor who specialized in old Earth books and had the dubious distinction of both hiding and selling them. "Tor," Zephyr greeted him, eyeing the satchel slung over his shoulder. "What's the latest?" "Heard we made a bit of a splash out there." Tor grinned, revealing teeth that were surprisingly intact for someone who hung around the bazaar. "You could say that. Word is spreading like wildfire. Took down Fenris, didn't you?" "We might have helped him with an impromptu retirement plan," Lark said, arms crossed as she watched the crowd with a sharp gaze. "More like a semi-permanent vacation," Shade added, grinning. "Whatever you call it, you've got folks talking." Tor looked around, then lowered his voice. "And I heard something interesting. Some of Fenris's old crew are interested in talking. Could be they're looking for safer employment." Zephyr raised an eyebrow. "We're not exactly hiring. Our benefits package is mostly just don't die horribly." "Doesn't stop them from trying," Rook said with a shrug. "We've got one hell of a health plan, though. It's called running very, very fast." Zephyr considered it. More crew could mean more opportunities, but it also meant more mouths to feed and more chances for betrayal. Still, if ex-Fenris crew were jumping ship, it might mean the legend was growing faster than she'd thought. "Tell them we're interested in talking," she said finally. But make it clear we've got zero tolerance for backstabbers and drama queens." Tor nodded, his grin widening. "Sounds like a plan, and you know where to find me if you need anything else." They spent the rest of the day wandering the bazaar, soaking in the sights and sounds, restocking their supplies and swapping stories with other traders. The news of their victory was spreading, and it wasn't long before they started hearing their own names in the whispers and murmurs. "Guess we're famous now," Shade said as they paused at a vendor selling suspiciously cheap engine parts. "Just what I always wanted," Lark replied, dry as dust. "You're telling me," Zephyr said, eyeing a piece of machinery that looked like it might fall apart if someone sneezed too hard. "Fame's a fickle thing out here. One day you're the talk of the stars, the next you're just another burned-out husk floating on the edge of nowhere. But for now," Rook said, hefting a box of supplies, "we're the ones with the upper hand, and I say we ride that wave for as long as we can." They finished their business and headed back to the ship, the weight of their newfound notoriety settling into place like an old coat. The bazaar buzzed with life behind them, its chaos a comforting constant in a galaxy that seemed determined to throw the unexpected their way. On board, Shade was the first to break the silence, leaning back in his chair with a look of contentment. "So, what do we call this chapter of our adventure?" "The Ballad of the Barely Surviving Misfits, or How Not to Die in Space, Volume 1, Lark suggested, stretching out in her seat. Zephyr chuckled, feeling a genuine smile tug at her lips. "Whatever we call it, we've made it through, and I'd say that's worth celebrating." Rook raised an imaginary glass, his grin infectious. "To surviving, to stories, and to scaring the hell out of anyone who thinks they can take us down." The crew joined in, the moment punctuated by the hum of the ship and the distant murmur of the bazaar beyond. They'd come through the fire, and though the scars were fresh and the future uncertain, they were still standing, still fighting. And in the grand, unforgiving expanse of space, that was no small feat.